This is the MFTF quick guide on data. Today we'll be looking at using data within tests. The primary reference for this is our DevDocs, Magento Functional Test Framework Guide data page, but we'll run through a few examples and show you how data is defined, where it's defined, and how we can use it in tests, either directly by reference or by using our create data action to persist the data into the database. So, if we begin by looking at some simple data, so looking at our data here, we have a data.xml file. These data files live in the data directory under test MFTF of the module. We are looking at the customer module today. If we look at this simple US customer, it has a name and a type, and then it has data keys, key names, and then values for those corresponding keys. Also look at optional attribute, unique. Unique can have one of two values, either prefix or suffix. Prefix will take some unique data and append it to the start of the value string, and suffix will add it to the end. So in this case, a unique prefix for the email john.doe. What that's going to do is add some data at the front of the email address randomly. What that means is that this customer can be used multiple times, and the value that would normally hit a constraint in the system that you're trying to use the same email address more than once. Now it'll have a unique value that'll no longer be the case. We'll also see in this simple US customer, while it has keys and values, it also has another type that's required entity. That also has a type address, and that's US address Texas. What that is that this simple US customer represents a customer entity, but there's a restriction. Customer entities must have, are required to have, an address entity attached. We can see that it's using US address Texas, which is right here. And so when you create the customer, this simple US customer, it'll automatically use this US address as its required entity. And in that way, you just need to create the customer and not worry about having the required entities that are attached. They're already defined in the data file. So let's look at this in a test. We're looking at admin create customer test. This is a simple case. This is using data directly by reference. So within this test, we can see here, we are using the data by reference, customer entity 1, right here. Similar type of customer to before. And you'll see this is referenced in double braces. These double braces tell the test that it should resolve that reference to a data file. In this case, it looks for the entity customer entity 1 and takes the first name field and fills that to that selector. So that's directly taking the value from the key in the entity and then applying it to the fill field action. We can also see that it's further used in a C once you've created the customer to check that that customer exists. In the same way, it's using the syntax to reference. That's the simple way of using the data. There is a further way of using the same data entity, and we can look at a create data action. This is contained in a before. We will look at that in a further video. This is essentially a prerequisite for the test. Before we run our test actions in this test, we're going to create these. The create data operates via an API call to populate a record in the database, and there's two of them here. There's simple US customer. There's another simple US customer, but in the second customer, what we're doing is overloading the fields. So there's a simple US customer without overloading, takes the data directly as it is in the entity. First name John, last name Doe. But in the second customer, it's actually going to overload the first name field to John 1 and the last name field to Doe 1. In that way, you can use data, entities, and overload any fields that you need to. Now, these are created in the database and they're ready to act upon. You have the data, either from the field keys you've overloaded, but there's also return data that's automatically generated, or there's data that is unique and you don't have any way of predicting that unique sequence in advance. But the test itself will store the data that was used and the subsequent returns and allow you to use those further in the test. Let me show you an example of this. If we take the first data entity here, it has a step key, create customer. Step key is how we uniquely identify a test step. Because it's a unique identifier for this action, we can then use that step key to reference back to what happened in that action. Here, a create data call for this customer. So if we look down the test, we can see, for example, so we're going to check the customer name and last name in the welcome message. You see user input welcome. And then we use this syntax, the $, and we can do create customer, not using an entity, but the step key from above, dot first name. So it's telling it to resolve to the result of that creation above via the step key and the first name field of that. Same with the last name as well. So here we've created it, populated the database, and also been able to use those values in the test itself. Now, the final type of data action that's available, that's a grab action. If you refer to the MFTF dev docs and look at the list of test actions, there are several grab actions available. This particular one is a grab value from. What it does is it grabs a value from the selector. So it's looking at checkout cart summary postcode. And we have the step key grab text postcode. What we now have is whatever value is from there, it's saved, and we can reference it by the step key grab text postcode. Now that we have it within the scope of the test, we can use it. So we're doing an assert equals, and we're looking for an expected result, and we're using there a type variable and the grab text postcode from above. And that's how we can use the grab actions to take information from the page that's under test and then use that and assert against it later in the test. That's been a brief introduction to data and its use in MFTF. Thank you for joining, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you.